everybody, I'm Zoe Burmester. Today we are making some sweet peas, a very relatively simple sugar flour to make that's quite nice for filling in those gaps. And it's a nice one if you're beginning to do wired flours but you're not so confident. This is a good one to start with because it's not too tricky, not too difficult. So what you're going to need is some florist paste. This one I have just coloured a very slight peach. Because we're going to colour and we're going to dust on top, always start much paler than you're going to end up. It just gives you a bit more flexibility with the colour. So we need some florist paste. You can either use a 24, 26 gauge florist wire, something like that. Sweet pea cutters. I don't have sweet pea cutters. I tend to improvise an awful lot. Sweet pea cutters look generally like this. This is a template I've cut out with card. So I had a little rummage through my cupboards to see what I had. This is actually one of a set of a peony cutter, and I sort of decided, well, actually I could use that for the base of my cutter and then cut in for the top. I'm going to use my oval cutter here to give me the shape of the outer leaf. You have two different leaves on the sweet pea, I'll explain later. So I'm just improvising. I'm going to use a heart cutter just to create the shape at the bottom. Because I don't have one, because I don't make them all that often, because I'm not pretending this is going to be a super botanically correct flour, but hopefully when it's finished everybody will know that it's a sweet pea. I need a cell pad, which is where I'm going to frill my petals. And ball tools, I tend to use ends with different sizes, just give me a bit of flexibility. Florist tape, a small rolling pin, and a little bit of edible glue or egg white for putting everything together. So let's begin. Okay, I'm going to show you how to make the open flour. Normally, when you put together a spray of sweet peas, you'll have possibly a bud at the top, then two smaller flowers, and then you'll open up to the fully open flour. I'll explain those stages as I do them, but we'll make the full flour. So this is feels like a 24 gauge wire I have here. 26 gauge is absolutely fine. And using a pair of needle nose pliers, which I don't have, so I'm using my fingers, we're going to create a little hook at the top, if you can see that, little hook into the top of the wire, just like that, like a little candy cane. I'm going to dip that into some egg white, and I'm going to wipe off the excess on my hand. So what we want to do is we want to create a little sort of teardrop shape, really. It's going to go a little bit smaller on that. I'm going to create the bud. Just going to go slightly smaller. Okay, so I don't even know what that's the size of. A big pea, I suppose. I'm going to bring that down into a sort of conical teardrop shape. I'm going to take my prepared wire. Oops, if I can get my fingers on it. And I'm going to insert the hook into the bottom of the fat part of the cone. And then just using my fingers, I'm going to squeeze and pinch the base of that together, just so that it doesn't slip off. Got sticky hands here, but okay. So that's what you want to start with, okay? Once you've got that, you want to take your fingers and using your thumb and your forefinger, you want to pinch out one side of this teardrop. Can you see what I'm doing there? Just pinching that out. Okay. I'm doing this while the paste is soft, so I have to be careful that I don't knock it off its hook. Right, you see what I've done there? I'm going to place that onto my board. And I'm going to take my slightly smaller ball tool and I'm just going to put some pressure on the edge of the piece that I've already pulled out to create a frill. And what I'm doing is I'm creating the center piece of that sweet pea. You see that? Okay. I'm just going to pop that into my polystyrene former over here and leave it to dry, okay? And that's one that I made yesterday, so that is already dry, okay? That is the central part. Okay, so now let's move on and make the other leaves. Now, as I say, if you have sweet pea cutters at home, this is going to be easy. If you don't have sweet pea cutters at home, do as I did and improvise. So these are the two shapes that we are aiming for. And if ever you're not sure and you don't have the cutters at home and you want to have a look, go online, have a little search, understand what it is that you're aiming for. So I'm going to take a piece of well-kneaded flour paste. Just going to rub a tiny bit of Trex onto my slightly grubby board there. I'm just going to roll my paste out. Now the reason that this is a good flower to start with is that these petals are not individually wired in the way that most are. So if you, as I said earlier, if you're just beginning to get into wired flowers and a little bit uncertain, a sweet pea is a great one to start with because the only wire was that central wire that we put into the bud. So you want to, when you're rolling your florist paste even, you want it nice and thin. I wouldn't use gum paste for this. You could probably for this because you're not putting a wire through it. To be honest, if I'm making flowers, I always use florist paste. It gets super fine. I know I can frill it really nicely. I like the way it sets. It hardens quite quickly, which when you're dusting and then wanting to form works really well. So personally, I would always go for florist paste. You can see how lovely and fine that is. So this is my first shape, which I don't have. So I've improvised by using a peony cutter, which I do have at home. Just going to cut that out. Oops. Nearly send my other cake flying. Let's just pop that out here. And then I'm going to turn this upside down just to create that V at the top. Like I said, I'm not pretending this is botanically correct, but it's very, very close. And for me at this point, I'm just going to take those tips off. Now, if I were making millions of sweet peas, don't get me wrong, I would go out and I would buy the cutter. But if I'm only making a few, then I don't mind doing this by hand. Okay, so that's our first leaf, our first petal, I should say. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put that on my board. I'm going to take my larger ball tool and I now want to just stretch and soften. And you can see I'm just applying even pressure all the way around, okay? And then I'm going to take this tool and with the tool half on the petal and half on the pad, by pressing around, you can see the movement that is being created, okay? The more I press and the more I go round, the frillier it will become. Now, sweet peas are quite frilly. Look at that. That's a gorgeous little frill. Sweet peas are quite frilly, so you can go to town if you want to with this. Okay. So you want to let that set and harden a little bit. Probably be, if you're careful, you could probably do it sort of within half an hour or so. As I say, you have to plan ahead a little bit with sugar flowers. So if you make buds and certain central bits the day before, then you know that you can work on them much easier. So I'm taking my petal. I'm just going to take a little bit of my edible glue or egg white, whatever you're using. Just going to paint a tiny bit too much in there. You don't want to overdo this because otherwise you do end up with a little bit of a gooey old mess on your hands. I speak from experience. Okay, then we're just going to do that in there. Then I'm going to take my bud and I'm going to centrally place that in the middle of this petal. I just want to cup this petal that we've just frilled around my central bud. You can see already, right, how that's taking shape. And again, there's kind of no right or wrong. We're dealing with nature, right? They don't grow perfectly. They don't grow uniformly. So as long as the principle is correct that you follow, how it manifests itself isn't too much of a worry. Okay. So you can see, so we've got our bud and we've got our first leaf. So next we're going to go with our final leaf, which is this shape. Again, a shape I don't have, but I do have ovals. So I'm going to cut my oval. Now, florist paste dries out super quickly, so if you're not using it, cover it up. If I'm making lots of petals and lots of leaves, I tend to cut lots out, put them under plastic sheeting, and then come back and do what I need to do. Otherwise, it could be very, very time consuming. Okay, so I'm just going to shape the bottom part. In fact, I'm just going to take a little bit more off. I'm going to take my pad, and I really do want to stretch this one out. So imagine you've got your bud, your first petal is a sort of heart shape, and your third is much more of a sort of regular petal shape with a curved underside, just to help you form it around that central bud. Okay? Now, we can attach this like this. If you want to go one stage further and just add a little bit more realism, before we super frill, I'm just going to flatten that out again. I want to show you, where is it? We can vein. There are all sorts of, veiners out there. This is a double-sided rose veiner, which would work pretty well. This one is just a generic lined petal veiner. I bought this when I was living in Italy, and it's quite a versatile one as well. And what you would do is, before you go in for your super frill, so I'm working slightly backwards here, you would just pop that into your veiner and press that down nice and firmly, which gives you this lovely veining. You see? Just move that out of the way, and then you'd come in and do your, what I call the top frill, the super frill. And as I say, sweet peas are particularly frilly flowers, so you can really go to town here. Then you want to just grab a little bit of your glue or egg white. You want to pick up your bud. I'm just going to lift this up and do this on my hands, probably easier. And then in the same way, you just want to wrap that around. Okay. Now with this top petal, you can fold back, shape it how you want to. Again, there are some rules, but there are not some rules too, so don't sort of need to be too precious. So you can see really just 3 elements there has created a really, really pretty flower. If you wanted to do the different stages, you can stop after the second layer and not do the third layer. The third layer just creates a slightly more open flower. So you want to leave this now to dry. Shape it as you're happy with and just let that to dry. The next phase is colouring. Colouring your flowers. Let's make a little bit of space. So, again, in true Blue Peter fashion, nope, it's not that one. Okay, here's one that I made earlier. So this is set, this is hard now, which allows me to dust Okay, so I essentially just want to enrich the peachy pink colour that I have. And you can see here I've gone for I've got a lemon, I have a coral, I have a sort of blush petal rouge pink here, and then I have a baby pink. And when you're dusting flowers, especially something delicate like a sweet pea, quite often you'll find the concentration of colour is in the bud, okay? And then you'll get concentrations of colour around the edges of the petal. You don't want to blanket flat colour the whole thing because you'll lose the interest. Let's have a look at one that I've sort of dusted earlier. You can see I've gone in darker for these slightly smaller ones and come out. And obviously don't forget to dust the backs as well. So I'm going to start. Now I don't have it here, but quite often if I'm dusting and I'm mixing dusters, I work on wax paper, and I mix my colours together on the wax paper. So I'm going to start by mixing a little bit of lemon and a little bit of this kind of pale coral together. And I'm going to start by just dusting the insides of this flower. Going lightly in. Be gentle. It's heartbreaking when you snap your petals at this stage. This is also why I always make extra. If I know I only maybe need 3 flowers or so on a display that I'm going to do, I will probably make 5. One might break, I might not like one of them. And it's such a process, flower making, even simpler ones, that you just don't want to be doing things twice, right? So, always worth making that extra one. Then I'm going to go in slightly deeper. Again, you see I've started from light to dark. And I'm going to take this slightly darker pink and I'm going to use the edge of my brush to come in and do these leaves. It's going to go a little bit darker. And again, I'm going to concentrate into the middle of the flower. Start light and build up. Very difficult to take the colour away, so just do yourself a favour and just, if you're not sure, go slower. So you can see, just by adding onto the edge here, how I've got that lovely two-tone effect. I've gone from a yellowy peach through to this sort of lovely soft baby pink on the edges, like an ombre, mermaidy ombre. I love it. This tickles me so much. It really does. It really does. And then if you have veined, as you dust in, some of that colour will dip into the grooves of the veins, and that will also add depth. So just work your way around until you are happy. As I say, don't forget the back. Usually the backs of petals are lighter than the front of them. But study the flower that you are trying to recreate. And just work your way around, as I say, until you are happy with the coloration. Now again, fantasy flowers, I could paint this, I could paint this any old colour if I wanted to. If you want to be more realistic, then search for sweet peas and see what colours they come up with. They're usually pastel. Get lovely soft lilacs and peaches and pinks. So you just kind of keep going until you're happy with the coloration. Once you are happy with the coloration, you need to set the colour because dust transfers. Especially if you're putting it against a white cake, the last thing you want to do is cover it in coloured dust. The way to do that is to either hold it over a kettle, or perhaps some of you have some of those steamers that you can just plug in and just wave it over the steamer lightly. Too close to the steam, the colour will run. Lightly sort of waft it over the steamer, and that will set the colour for you. And that's it really. Now, I won't show you today, but I'll just talk you through. Obviously, the sweet pea has leaves. It also has these kind of curly tendrils. The leaves I've just cut from I think I freehand cut these, veined them and dusted them. The tendrils, I'll just show you really quickly. I've taken some, oops, it's not very happy there, is it? Some green florist wire, which I'm just going to twist together. Just I cut off a really big bit, so it's just taking me a little bit longer. Anyway. And I don't have my scissors to hand, so I would doing it by hand. And then if you just wrap this around something like a brush, just wrap it round like this. Let's just get that going. I'm just showing you the principle very quickly. You can then, that will obviously create your tendril, right? So, buds, slightly smaller, flowers, a slightly more open flower, and then once you're putting everything together, we always cover the wires with florist tape, so you're not actually having a look at wires. And then you can just put the whole thing together. Really simple little flower with a lot of impact. I hope that's been helpful. And yeah, have a go. Oh, I have forgotten something. See? Talking and demonstrating at the same time. I've just seen this one and I've forgotten. The back of most flowers have something called a calyx. I should know this. I got picked up by on this calyx point at Cake International by one of the judges. So at the back of the flower, you have the little petals, leaf petals that go behind the flower. Now, to keep life simple, you could actually just dust this in. So with a little bit of green up the top, you can just dust in the calyx, okay? If you want to actually make your calyx, you could roll out a little bit of green florist tape and cut a tiny little star cutter and just put it onto the back, also dusting it. But you can see, actually, and for the kinds of uses that I use my sugar flowers in, something like this with the leaves and everything, to me is absolutely fine and does the job. So that's up to you to choose, but just that little bit of green at the back just makes the whole thing that more complete. And then with your leaves and your tendrils, you've got a great knockout little flower to put on your displays.